Hello everyone. In this video, I am going to provide you a brief analysis canto-wise of Pale Fire alongside the commentary in this particular book. So try to follow up the lines. So the canto 1 starts with the following lines. I was the shadow of the waxwing slain by the false azure in the window pane. So this is one of the most famous openings in 20th century literature. John Shade immediately establishes the theme of illusion versus reality with these following lines. The waxwing bird flies directly into a glass window because it misinterprets the reflection of the blue sky, which is referred to as false azure. By identifying not with the bird but with the shadow, quote unquote, shadow of the dead bird, Shade introduces an eerie, ghostly detachment. It sets up the central premise of the book, which is living in a reflected and deceptive reality. I was the smudge of ashen fluff, and I lived on, flew on in the reflected sky. Here, John Shades want to focus on the bird leaves a tragic physical remnant on the glass, but its spirit or consciousness seems to project forward into the mirror world. Shade is fascinated by what survives that and how art or memory can allow something to live on in an artificial medium. And from the inside too, I would duplicate myself, my lamp, an apple on a plate. The perspective now shifts from looking at the outside world to looking out from the inside. At night, a dark window we have seen resembles or acts as a sort of mirror. Shade watches his own domestic reality double itself on the glass pane, blending his interior life with the dark exterior world. The following lines which read as, uncurtaining the night, I would let dark glass hang all the furniture above the grass. By pulling back the curtains, the reflection superimposes his indoor furniture onto the outdoor lawn. This creates a surreal or surrealist landscape where heavy indoor objects seem to float weightlessly outside. And how delightful when a fall of snow covered my glimpse of lawn and reached up so as to make chair and bed exactly stand upon that snow out in that crystal land. So, when it snows, the white ground rises to meet the exact visual baseline of the reflected furniture. This creates a sort of optical illusion which becomes perfect. His bed and chair appear perfectly placed in a magical, frozen, or external wonderland. This emphasizes Shade's deep craving to find order, symmetry, and magic within accidental alignments. Retake the falling snow, each drifting flake, shapeless and slow, unsteady and opaque, a dull dark white against the day's pale white, and abstract larches in the neutral light. So here shade shifts from a night scene to a daylight observation of winter. He strips away the romance of snow, describing it technically, like we are using the words like unsteady, opaque, and dull dark white. He views nature through a painterly or photographic eye, noting how white flakes ironically look dark when contrasted against a brilliant overcast sky. The following lines, and then the gradual and dual blue as night unites the viewer and the view. As twilight approaches, the sharp division between the inside observer, which is referred to as the viewer in the above line, and the outside world, which can be defined as the view, dissolves into a singular deep blue harmony. And in the morning, diamonds of frost express amazement, whose part feet have been crossed from left to right the blank page of the road. So, frost, as we all know, on the ground looks like glittering diamonds. Shade compares the untrodden snowy road to a blank page, a classic meta literary note to his own writer's journey. The animal tracks are sparred feet that leave characters or symbols on this blank page. Now, reading from left to right in Winter's code, a dot, an arrow pointing back. Repeat. Talkative beauty, sublimated grouse, finding your china right behind my house. So here Shade reads the bird tracks like a text. The dot and arrow describe the physical shape of bird's footprint in the snow. A torquated, which can be called as the collared or ringed bird, like a grouse is hunting for food, digging into the earth. To a bird, digging down to find food is playfully equated to digging to China, finding a whole hidden world right in the poet's backyard. Was he in Sherlock Holmes, the fellow whose tracks point back when he reversed his shoes? Shade makes a pop culture detective fiction reference in the following lines. He's trying to recall a specific character, as we all are aware of Sherlock Holmes while reading detective novels stories, where a character eludes capture by walking backward or reversing his shoes to falsify his tracks. This highlights the theme of backtracking, deception, and decoding clues that run rampant through Nabokov's work. If you go forward, you can find the following lines as: all colors made me happy, even grey. My eyes were such that whatever day took photographs whenever I would permit, or with a silent shiver or the The poet here describes an almost photographic, hyper-perceptive childhood. He possessed a profound aesthetic appreciation for the world, able to manually frame visual moments in his mind's eye at will. Whatever in my field of vision dwelt, an indoor scene, hickory leaves, the spell slitterloss of a frozen stillicide was printed on my eyelids nether side, where it would tear for an hour or two, and while this lasted, all I had to do was close my eyes to reproduce the leaves on indoor scene or trophies on the eaves. So here John Shade describes a vivid after-image effect, that is, we can say the eidetic memory. After staring at something, whether warm autumn leaves or the sharp dagger-like icicles dripping from his roof, the image remained burnt onto the back of his eyelids. By simply closing his eyes, he could revisit a perfect private gallery of his day's observation. So I cannot understand why from the lake I could make out our front porch when I would take Lake Road to school, whilst now, although no tree has intervened, I look but fail to see. Here, the poet or John Shade here tries to focus on a haunting shift in spatial physics or memory. As a child walking to school, Shade could see his home clearly from a specific vantage point near the particular lake. As an adult, despite no new trees blocking the view, he can no longer see it. This underscores how the landscapes of our youth psychologically alter, drift, or close themselves off to us as we age. The house itself is much the same. One wing we have had revamped. There's a solarium. There's a picture window flanked with fancy chairs. TV's huge paperclip now shines instead on the steep vein so often visited by the lookless gory mockingbird. Shade details the modernization of his home. The old weather vane, once a favorite perch for a lookless mockingbird, has been replaced by a modern television antenna, described brilliantly as a huge paperclip. Technology replaces nature, altering the skyline of his personal history. So, I was an infant when my parents died. They both were ornithologists. I have tried so often to evoke them that today I have 1,000 parents. Sadly, they dissolve in their own virtues and recede. We learn a foundational trauma. Shade was orphaned as a baby. His parents were bird experts, and because he has no real memories of them, he attempts to imagine them have resulted in a blurred, fragmented thousand parents, quote unquote thousand parents, that made of hearsay and generic virtues rather than concrete human memories. They slip away like ghosts whenever he tries to grip them. And cancer of the pancreas to her, a preterist, one who collects cold knees. Here was my bedroom, now reserved for guests. If you follow some lines and go back some stanzas, you can find these particular lines. So, after noting his parents' clinical causes of death, Shade defines himself as a preterist. Historically, it defines someone who focused on the past or past actions. He metaphorically collects coldness like abandoned homes, dead parents, vanished memories. He feels like a ghost in his own life, noting that his childhood bedroom is now just a sterile guest room. There were dull tropes in my Triassic, green optical spots in upper Pleistocene, an icy shiver down my age of stone, and all tomorrows in my funny bone. Here Shade maps his physical body and neurological ailments onto geological epoch. His long history of strange, fainting seizures feel as old as the earth itself. His past is prehistoric, that's why it is referred to as Stone Age, while his anxiety about the future, which is referred by the particular phrase all tomorrows, sits like a vulnerable, sensitive nerve in his funny bone. During one winter, every afternoon, I would sink into that momentary swoon, and then it ceased. Its memory grew dim. My health improved. I even learned to swim. So here he tries to recall a childhood medical anomaly. Daily fleeting fainting spells or seizures, that is momentary swoon. Eventually, the physical ailment faded, allowing him to live a normal, robust boyhood, but the psychological mark is still remaining. But, like some other lad forced by a wench, with his pure tongue her abject thirst to quench, I was corrupted, terrified, allured, and though all doctor could pronounce me cured of what he said were mainly growing pains, the wonder lingers and the shame remains. So Shade uses a startling, deeply uncomfortable metaphor to describe his relationship with his childhood seizures. He compares the terrifying pull of losing consciousness to being sexually violated or initiated by an older woman. The experience of the swoon was taboo, frightening, yet strangely addictive. Even though his childhood doctor dismissed it lightly as mere growing pains, the adult poet is still haunted by the cosmic wonder of what he saw on the other side of the consciousness and the deep private shame of having succumbed to it. Now moving on to canto number 2. So it starts with the line, there was a time in my demented youth when somehow I suspected that the truth about survival after death was known to every human being. I alone knew nothing, and a great conspiracy of books and people hid the truth from me. Now Shade shifts from the physical growing pains of Canto 1 into intellectual and spiritual anxieties. As a young man, he suffered from a paranoid, egocentric delusion that the mystery of life after death had already been solved by someone else. He imagined humanity was locked in a cosmic conspiracy to keep him in the dark. This sets up the lifelong earnest quest to decode the afterlife through art rather than through religion. There was the day when I began to doubt man's sanity. So here the delusion breaks. Shade realizes that humanity does not possess a secret answer to death. Rather, everyone is just as blind and terrified as he is. To cope with this void, he finds grounding not in cosmic theories but in human connection itself, specifically his relationship with his wife Sybil. So, Sybil, throughout our high school days, I knew your loveliness, but I fell in love with you during an outing of the entire senior class to New Y Falls. So, here Shade addresses his wife Sybil directly. The love is portrayed as tender, sweet Americana, a high school trip to a local waterfall. This introduces the theme of water, which initially represents romance and vitality, but will later take on a dark, fatal meaning in this canto. The middle section of Canto 2 tracks the childhood and adolescence of their own daughter Hazel, who is born into their happy marriage but plagued by social isolation and lack of conventional beauty. She details the quiet, cozy habits of his and Sybil's life together, contrasting it sharply with Hazel's alienation. While her parents read and converse, Hazel spends nights alone in her room, listening to the television or trying to communicate with poltergeist and nature. Hazel is hypersensitive, much like her father. She notices things others miss, but her peer groups reject her. Shade watches her struggle with deep empathy, agonizing over her loveliness and her inability to find love. The emotional peak of this canto takes place on a foggy winter night when Hazel goes out on a blind date, an event her parents anxiously monitor from home. So was that the phone? You listen at the door. More headlights in the fog. There was no sense in window rubbing, only some white fans. And the reflector poles pass by unmasked. Are we quite sure she's acting right? You ask. The atmosphere is dense with dread and heavy fog. John and Sybil are pacing their house, rubbing the windows to peer into the dark, a direct callback to the window pane motifs of Canto 1 that we have read earlier. They are terrified that the date is going poorly. So if you move forward, you can find the lines. It's technically a blind date, of course. Well, shall we try the preview of Remorse and we allowed in all tranquility the famous film to spread its charmed mark. To distract themselves from their parental anxiety, they turn on the television to watch a movie. Shade uses a staggering bit of foreshadowing here. He capitalizes remorse. Watching the film is a literal preview of the lifetime of grief and regret they are about to inherit. So please make sure that you have marked or you have highlighted that particular word remorse. Towards the end of this canto, it shifts to Hazel's perspective as she is rejected by her date and begins her journey home. So, towards the end, you can find a line she, instead of riding home, got off at Lochanhead. So, instead of taking the bus all the way back to her comforting family home, Hazel steps off early into the freezing night at a stop near a lake called Lochanhead. In the final lines of this particular canto, that is canto number 2, Shade recounts how Hazel walks down to the frozen black waters of the lake. The water imagery that began with the romantic New Wire Falls comes to a devastating conclusion. Hazel drowns herself. Canto 2 ends in the absolute quiet of this loss, transitioning the poet into Canto 3, where his obsession with finding out what happens after death becomes no longer an academic or philosophical curiosity but a desperate parental necessity. So, canto number 3, we can find a line is a hidden group that meets in drafting parlors of commercial streets, seeking to punch a peephole through the dark and catch some spiritual, immortal spark. So, here Shades begin his quest by auditing organized spiritualism. So here, l'avenir is the French word for the future, is a shadow scientific medium group. Shade points paints a bleak, sterile picture of their operations. They meet in a cheap, drafty rooms trying to desperately punch a peephole into eternity. The lines, the medium, a lady dressed in mauve, claimed she could hear the voice of Jim McGrath. She muttered of a bright and narrow path and spoke in numbers 7, 14, 3. She mocks the cliches of sciences. The lady in mauve speaks in generic, uninspired religious tropes, that is bright and narrow path. The random numbers are exposed as cheap parlor tricks meant to mimic divine codes. Shade rejects this institutionalized afterlife because it lacks aesthetic elegance. So towards line number 562 to 63, you can find these following lines. Then came the blackout. In the public hall, my heart stopped beating. I could feel the fall of heavy curtains, absolute and black, as my frail body slipped off the track. So here Shade recounts his own literal clinical death during a lecture he gave at a university hall. The heavy curtains are a theatrical metaphor for the sudden shutting off sensory reality. Towards line 571, you can find, and then I woke up inside a distinct dark space. I felt distributed through time and place. One foot was hydroplane, the other rhyme. floating across a boundary sublime. So his near death experience is not biblical, it is artistic. His consciousness detaches from his flesh and dissolves into the raw ingredients of his own mind, that is physics, which is connoted by the particular word hydroplane, and language, which is connoted by the use of the word rhyme. He is literally floating on the edge of the mortal universe. Towards line 585 or 86 you can find, and there it played against the darkling grey, a tall white fountain spraying light and spray, rising magnificent from some deep floor, a monument upon that outer shore. This is the central vision of the canto. In the absolute void of death, she sees a majestic, glittering white fountain shooting upward into the dark. When the doctor resuscitates him and young him back to life, this image becomes a spiritual North Star. If you know what North Star is, or if you don't know, please go through it. He is utterly convinced that he has seen the literal architectural blueprint of the hereafter. So towards line 641, 42, you can find, months later in a magazine I read about a woman who had also died upon an operating table, she recounting her brief touch of eternity. So here she encounters an article about a woman from a nearby town who underwent a similar brief death. This triggers his investigate instinct. He needs to know if her vision matches his, which would provide objective, empirical proof of life after that. So, towards line 680, you can find, I went to see her. She was old and frail. I asked her what she saw beyond the veil. A fountain, she replied, a spray of light that played continuously through the night. Shade visits the woman and she delivers the magic word, a fountain. For a brief, intoxicating moment, Shade experiences absolute spiritual ecstasy. He believes that he has broken the cosmic code. That is, two independent minds saw the exact same geometric structure on the other side of that. So towards 750 number lines, you can see, I tracked the journalist who wrote the piece, seeking a final absolute release. From doubt, I asked him if our words were plain. He laughed and said, we had to print again. So here, Shade, being a precise craftsman of language, double-checked the source within the newspaper typewriter to confirm the exact wording. The journalist's casual laugh introduces a sudden, sickening dread. So, a misprint, said the man. A stencil blot. Look at the copy. 911 slot. 14. It wasn't fountain that she said. She saw a mountain. We had reread. The cruelest twist of the poem. The woman never saw a fountain. She saw a white mountain. The magnificent, synchronized cosmic symmetry that gave Shade so much comfort was nothing more than a typographical error. A sleepy newspaper editor accidentally swapping an F for an M. So, life everlasting based upon a typo. The grand design collapsed into an O. Shade is initially devastated. His profound mathematical proof of heaven dissolves into a joke. The grand design of eternity is reduced to a meaningless typographical circle, a zero. But it sufficed. It didn't matter who had cooked the code or who had wrote it. If you could find a web of sense, yes, it sufficed that all contents were linked, white linked and spliced. So here Shade's ultimate philosophical breakthrough. Instead of sinking into despair after finding out the typographical mistake, he has a massive epiphany. He realizes that the universe does not communicate in obvious literal dogmas. The true beauty of existence is that it is a game of textures, wordplay, and accidental harmonies. The typo itself is a form of art. What coats of cloud? What message in the frost? No particle of soul or time is lost. We are but players in a game of chess, moving toward a patterned wilderness. He finds a deeper secular fate that the universe is a grand jigsaw puzzle or a masterfully designed chess match. The typo wasn't a cruel void, it was a beautiful coincidence that linked his mind to a stranger's text. So, I am reasonably sure that we survive in some textured fashion, half alive. Same in the art we leave, the rhymes we choose, secure behind our typographic clues. So, Canto 3 concludes with Shades achieving total peace regarding his daughter Hazel's death. Immortality isn't a little fountain in a golden heaven. We survive through the intricate patterns, art, and typographic clues we leave behind. By embracing the flaws and coincides of language, Shades finds the strength to sit down and write Canto 4. So, Canto 4 brings Shades' poem, which is of 999 lines, is to its ultimate destination. After the expansive, cosmic, and heartbreaking journeys of Canto 1 through 3, Canto 4 pulls sharply inward. It becomes a meta-poetic exploration of how art is physically made. She details his private creative process, reflects on the simple domestic textures that make an immortal life worth living, lists his petty real world grievances, and unknowingly tracks his final footsteps toward his own impending death. Canto 4 opens with a burst of bold, dramatic declarations of artistic intent, quickly pivoting to an intimate look at the poet's mind. So let's see. Now I shall spy on beauty as none has spied on it yet. Now I shall cry out as none has cried out. Now I shall try what none has tried. Now I shall do what none has done. So she shifts into an aggressive, triumphant tone. After reconciling with the random, jigsaw puzzle nature of the universe, at the end of the Canto 3, he commits himself entirely to a fearless, unparalleled pursuit of artistic expression. And speaking of this wonderful machine, I am puzzled by the difference between two methods of composing. A. The kind which goes on solely in the poet's mind, attesting or performing words while he is soaping a third game on leg, and B. The other kind, much more decorous when he is in his study writing with a pen. The wonderful machine is the human brain. In the lines we have read that, and speaking of this wonderful machine. So here wonderful machine is the human brain engaged in the act of artistic creation. Shade outlines his deep fascination into how poetry comes to be, categorizing it into two distinct methodologies, method A and method B. So, method A is completely fluid, internal, and unprompted, occurring while doing mundane, routine tasks like taking a bath. And method B is formal, structured, and deliberate, sitting in an office with a physical pen. This offers a delightful meta note from Nabokov himself, who, like Shade, famously rejected a typewriter or desk, preferring to write entirely on index card while sitting in bed or cars. The mention of index cards I have also previously mentioned to you, so please go through it. Shade dedicates a surprisingly long sequence, nearly 30 lines, to his meticulous morning shaving routine in the bathtub. Why would a poet searching for the meaning of life spend so much time describing shaving cream and razor blades? It marks Shade's ultimate realization. The true antidote to the horror of death is the sensory appreciation of daily life. He leaves behind abstract theological questions to find absolute comfort in the physical luxury of hot water, clean skin, and small rhythmic human rituals. In sharp contrast to his appreciation for small joys, Shade includes a playful, biting catalogue of contemporary social elements that he utterly despises. Now I shall speak of evil as none has spoken before. I loathe such things as jazz, the white horse modern torturing a black blue red with red, abstractist bric-a-brac, primitivist folk mass, progressive schools, music in supermarkets, swimming pools, brutes, bores, class conscious, Philistines, Freud, Marx, fake thinkers, powerful poets, frauds and sharks. So here Shade redefines evil away from demonic forces, applying it instead to the commercial, pretentious and intellectual trends of the mid-20th century. He aggressively mocks modern art, psychoanalysis, socio-economic reductionism and public annoyances. He firmly defends traditional, clear aesthetic values against what sees as fraud modernity. And through the flowing shade and ebbing light, a man unheedful of the butterfly, some neighbor's gardener, I guess, goes by, trundling an empty barrow up the land. The poem closes on a poignant image of domestic stillness. Twilight is falling. A local gardener rolls a wheelbarrow down the street, completely unaware of the butterfly flitting past him. The same butterfly that Shade used throughout the poem to symbolize the soul and hidden design. If you have not gone through my earlier videos, please go through it to find the connection of Shade and blue butterfly. Line number 999 is the final line Shade ever writes. He steps outside his home immediately after writing this couplet to Stretch, only to be instantly shot and killed. As Charles Kinbourne notes in the novel's commentary, Shade's supple sense of poetic symmetry suggests that he intended the poem to be exactly 1000 lines long. The unwritten line number 1000 would have been a perfect loop, repeating line number 1 verbatim, which is I was the shadow of a waxwing slain. Because that interrupts the poet mid-breath, the poem remains a permanent fragment, a flawed, open-ended, and beautiful monument to the human experience that mimics the accidental typos and misalignments Shade learned to embrace. That's all from today. See you in the next